Welcome back. We are here with some more. I guess not even more because it's been a while. We're here for some MMA DFS picks for DraftKings and FanDuel lineup advice. UFC 283. It's a live Q&A. We're doing this live here for 30 to 45 minutes. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, and joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. We had the long winter break. Then we had the shorter slate last time out. So Jake, it's been a long time, man. But what's up?
Yeah, man, what's going on, dude? It's been like a month. Feels like forever.
It really does. So we're gonna believe me, they backloaded all the fights. We got plenty of fights to talk about for this one. So 15 fights on the card, two title fights. We got Jamahal, Glover Teixeira, Deiveson Figueiredo, and Brandon Moreno. So what we're gonna do here in this video, I know it's been a while. If you're new, welcome. If you've been around for a while and you've seen us before, a little refresher. What we do is we're going to talk about these two title fights, what it means from a betting and DFS perspective. Again, 15 fights with two title fights. We're going to talk a little bit about how we expect to build lineups and the lineup constructions and ownership, and because it's a pretty rare type of slate from the size perspective. Six newcomers on the card. We will talk about all of them, their backgrounds, what we expect from them. Good fighter, good matchup, bad matchup fighters that have less than 4 UFC fights, a little more context to their stats and their fight logs. Give our favorite prize picks play. You see the promo code on screen. And we'll give our favorite stream parlay of the week, in addition to a fight that you have to target in DFS. So lots to cover. Again, 30 minutes or so. If you have questions, throw them in the chat box to the right of the screen here on YouTube. We'll answer them as we see them. And there's a note about the lock time, but as more people get in here, I will make sure to bring that up. Patrick's in the chat. What's up, Patrick? Appreciate you tuning in. All right, Jake, let's start with this 15 fight angle, because very rarely do we even have 15 fights on the card. And then obviously it happens more often, but still relatively rare compared to the number of UFC DFS slates we have. Two title fights. How are you approaching this? Mostly on DraftKings, but how are you approaching this from lineup construction, and how does it differ from other slates?
Yeah, man, 15 fights is crazy. So since the start of 2021, we've only had two slates that actually ended up having 15 fights. We had a couple that were scheduled at 15, and then you end up losing one or two. But we've only actually had two that actually went through with all 15 of them. So this just be the third one in over 2 years. So it is pretty crazy, man. It's a little bit daunting. I mean, I think you really have to eliminate some fighters. You can't just really play everyone. You kind of have to take a couple stands, at least get a few guys out of your prize pool, player pool.
Prize
Clearly
picks
rusty,
times
but
player pool.
yeah, man, it's been a while. Obviously, it's been a long week, man. Breaking down 30 fighters, six new fighters,
That's a
dude,
lot, dude.
killing me. But it really is, man. It's really testing the limits. But yeah, man, I think it is a little daunting to look at. But you definitely, if you take away, let's just say you take off four fighters off the board, that's basically down to like a 13 fight slate at that point. So I think that's a pretty good way to approach it, is kind of get a handful of guys out of your player pool to make it a little more manageable, where you can be over on the places that you like. You can have some good leverage spots, and you're not just spreading yourself too thin. So I think that's kind of a good starting point, just from the 15 fight standpoint. And then in terms of the having multiple 5 round fights, we've talked about this multiple times, but uh, typically the winners that we see on the winning lineups, they have exactly one 5 round fighter in them. So I looked at the last 10, and the last one we had was the Whaley Israel Adesanya Pereira slate, and that was the first time where we haven't had a single 5 round fighter in the winning lineup. And it's because Whaley, she got like the second round submission, scored like 92, 93 points. Pereira's losing the fight, ends up getting a late knockout. He scores like 92 points. Neither one of them ends up in the winning lineup. So that was the first time we haven't seen a 5 round fighter in the winning lineup on one of these slates. So I looked back at the other 9. We had 5 winners where we had exactly one 5 round fighter in the winning lineup, and we had 4 with 2. But if you look closer at the 4 that had 2 of those we had mispriced fighters on. The Nate Diaz and the RDA slate. So that's a lot harder for those guys to get left out. So I
Right.
think if we take away those mispriced slates, it's basically like 5-2. And then you look at how unique you can get. It's way easier to create unique lineups when you only include one. We had a much higher dupe rate when you had 2. So not only does the one 5 round fighter angle win more often, you win more money when it hits. So I think that's still the approach you want to take here.
It's a no-brainer. And all of those two title fight cards weren't 15 fight cards, right? They were all like 13, 14, or even
Right.
less.
Yeah.
So that opens up the
Correct.
possibility for the more fights you have in theory, the more chances for a 5-round fighter to get outscored. And so that is magnified
Hmm.
when we're up to 15 fights. And so for that reason alone, I think, yeah, I agree with you, Jake, that in your tournament lineups, you probably only want to play one 5-round fighter because there's so many other fighters that can outscore them. Plus, in the way these two fights, right? Figueiredo Moreno expected to go the distance. Hill and Teixeira, we could see a second round finish if one dominates the other in the first round and get left out of the optimal lineup, or just a quick submission by Glover or a quick knockout by Jamahal Hill, and all of a sudden now they're outscored by the other 100-point scorers on the slate. So lots of different ways they can get left out, and that also brings up the ownership angle. I see Danny is in the chat. He says the Galaxy Brain shipper of the day is Shogun, 20% odds to get the finish, only 10% owned. And we're going to find that a lot, Jake, on this slate. If I go to the model here, I'm going to bring up the model on my end, and we sort by DraftKings projected ownership. We have, 7 guys, 30% or more. On some slates, you're struggling to find just one sub 20% fighter that you feel good about to put in your tournament lineup to get different. Here we have like 2/3 of the slate is under 20% owned, including the rare 3%, 4%, 7%, 8% owned fighters that aren't even that. There's some bad ones in there, right? Like Patrick points out in the chat, like Shamil Abdul Rahmanov. But like some of these other fighters, and we've seen it on the 15 fight cards before, that we see multiple fighters under 10% even get into the optimal lineup. So easy way to get different here. It's I think the biggest trouble, Jake, is figuring out who you're going to X out of your player pool.
Yeah, I agree, man. We were talking a little bit about it earlier. I mean, a lot of the guys that, I wanted to X out, you made the good counterpoint. Like, these guys are low owned, so if they do win, it's a great leverage spot. So it is tricky figuring out who you're going to remove from your player pool, and actually, not removing guys that would give you good leverage positions if they do win.
Right, but the thing, and then your counterpoint to that to me was, yeah, almost everyone's low owned. So if you cross out a couple 13%ers or don't cross them out, there's still other fighters in that same ownership range. So it's pretty interesting. So before we move on to the main events, really quickly, AO in the chat says, "Do you think the Walker and Craig fight will be optimal?" What are your thoughts, Jay? Because seemingly every time Paul Craig is on the card, let me go back to DraftKings here and look at this fight. But seemingly every time Paul Craig is on the card, and he is an underdog, and he's always more popular than his opponent, the favorite. No difference here. Expect to be more popular than Johnny Walker. How does this fight get optimal? Do you think it's optimal?
Yeah, I mean, there's a good chance we get a finish, right? I mean, Paul Craig rarely sees a decision. His style of fighting makes it hard to really hit a huge ceiling. He's fighting off his back. He's not landing takedowns. He's not getting control time. He's really just getting the finishes and the submission attempts. Scores a little bit better on FanDuel, but it makes it hard for him to, score like 110. So when we have 15 fights, it's easier for him to get outscored by some other dogs. So I think he's going to if he wins, I think he's going to set the floor for dogs. And then it's just a question of whether or not we get some really high scoring dogs. And if we do, they're probably going to outscore him. And if we don't, then he'll probably end up in the winner. And if Paul Craig loses, yeah, I mean, Johnny Walker definitely could end up in the winner, but, he's got a lot of competition to get there at his price tag. So, I mean, I feel like all these guys that are, like from the mid eights up, it's kind of a crapshoot because they need a finish and they need to outscore like,
Yeah.
12 other fighters. So, I mean, it's hard to say he will be in the optimal because he could score 100 points, 105 points and still get left out.
And so here's the I think the takeaway everyone should have is that there's gonna be a lot of 100-point scores likely, and as we see on these bigger cards, you're not necessarily going to need the optimal in the largest tournament lineups. What really separates you is when you have the 3 to 15% fighter that no one else really has, and they score 100 points. And that's really where you get different. So I wouldn't focus too much, if you're watching this, focus too much on who can be optimal. Should I play this favorite? Should I not play this favorite? It's just find the lower owned fighters that you like, get those, mix them in heavily to your lineups. And if they go off, the rest of your lineup doesn't matter nearly as much as it would if you played all popular fighters, right, Jake?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you got to find some good leverage spots. Like, you can't just hammer all the chalk in this slate because even if that hits, I mean, that's it's going to be hard to be unique, but B, you have no leverage spots. I mean, we have so much good leverage. You got to take advantage of it.
Absolutely. All right. 9 minutes talking about leverage and lineup construction. So we got 21 minutes left to go through the rest of this. Not like we have 30 fighters to talk about. So Jake, let's start really quick. I know everyone wants to talk about the main events. They seem pretty binary to me, at least. But let's just really quickly Let's start with the fourth time these guys are fighting, Figueiredo and Moreno. Just quick rundown, what we can expect. Anything different from the previous three fights?
Yeah, so the big change on Deiveson is he hasn't fought in a year. He injured both of his hands, so he's coming off a couple of injuries. He moved from Arizona back to Brazil, so different training camp. I thought he looked better in Arizona. I'm not sure why he left. So that's, I would say, one red flag. Another year older, man. He's a flyweight. He's 35, coming off injuries, long layoff, new camp. I mean, definitely has some red flags, but my biggest thing with Figueiredo is I'm always just looking how he looked on the scales, and he weighed in early. He kind of pretended to be dragging. I don't know if he was just playing it up or if he was just messing around, but I didn't think he looked terrible. So that's the biggest red flag that we dodged with him. So I mean, I would say, you know, similar stance to how we came into the last couple fights with a few more red flags on him.
Fair enough. And let's move on to the other one, Jamahal Hill, Glover Teixeira. I mean, to me, this just seems like stylistically, DFS wise, Yuri versus Glover, but with a tighter salary range, 8,400, 7,800, where Yuri was a bigger favorite last time out. Am I wrong in that assessment?
No, I mean, I think that pretty much sums it up. One dimensional striker in Hill. He's a BJJ blue belt, similar to Yuri. He doesn't offer much on the ground except for, I really don't think Hill, I mean, I didn't think Yuri was going to get a sub, but I really don't think Hill is going to, be dangerous on the mat and looking for subs. I mean, the guy is a high volume striker. It really is a similar matchup with tighter pricing to the last one.
Which means it'll definitely score 180 DraftKings points in a stack as the Yuri and Glover fight. Speaking of stacks, two title fight cards. Generally, we're looking to stack one and play one from the other. Playing four 5-round fighters, guaranteeing two losers. Generally, not the way to go. Any different strategy based on this specific slate, Jake, for low risk?
No, I think you do the same thing. I think you got to either. I mean, I can see arguments for Xing out Moreno. I can see arguments for Xing out Hill or Teixeira. I ended up playing Hill, Figueiredo, and Moreno in cash. I think you got to take out one, and it's probably better to get two favorites and a dog than two dogs in the favorite. I would think, unless you can make a compelling point with your final few pieces. But yeah, I mean, I think you want to get the two guys that most likely go the distance. You're going to get a really good floor there. If we get an early knockout from Hill, you can really differentiate between the lineups that play all four, including Glover. So I think that gives you a pretty good point of differentiation in cash.
Fair enough. And when we talk about cash, we're talking 50-50s, double ups, head to heads. And Jake, there are no mispriced fighters aside from Moreno, right? Where the money line has moved to the point where they are mispriced on DraftKings.
Yeah, no, it's really just Moreno. He's on 8K as the favorite, so slight mispricing.
Okay, so that's the only one we need to keep in mind. Danny asked the question. Let's transition a little bit to high risk league satellites, GPPs. Which 5-rounder do you feel more comfortable fading? So I think the best way is to go to the extreme here, Jake, to answer these questions. If you're playing 150 lineups, you're playing 20 lineups, you're playing your single entry, you have to fade one of these fighters. You talked about playing one, just playing one of these 5-rounders in your tournament lineups. If you had to leave one fight out, which one would you feel the most comfortable doing?
Yeah, I would leave out the Moreno fight. I mean, just look at Moreno's past results. I mean, he's a history of scoring like 80 points, whether it's from a mid-round finish or a lower volume decision. So despite his cheaper price tag that makes it a little bit tougher, I think he's the one, and that's the fight I'm looking at leaving out.
Fair enough. MMA Grinders in the chat says MMA DFS is dying. They need to change everything back. The contests aren't filling. The prizes are getting smaller. To be fair, I am not a DraftKings apologist by any means when it comes to the MMA DFS scenarios that are going on. But the prizes are similar. The 50K back in December was same time as last year. This 100K $25 entry fee is actually the same as it was this time last year during the divisional round of the playoffs. So the prizes are there. I've talked to people behind the scenes. They're monitoring things very closely. Jake, just everyone is not happy with the late swap introduction, but just know that that's what we got to deal with, right? So we're handling it. And just on that point, I know we got a million fighters still to talk about, but have you noticed anything? Have you changed really much since the late swap's been going on?
Not a whole lot, man. I think if you're playing the way I am and you're trying to hit the best winning lineup on DraftKings, the toughest to find, optimal lineup, I don't think that much has changed. If you're looking at like min caching and changing stuff up mid slate, then yeah, a lot's changed. But in terms of hitting the nuts, I don't think it's changed all that much. You can make a couple adjustments, mid slate now. If you see you have the same lineup it happens to have the same fighter, you can diversify a little bit. But other than that, I haven't changed a ton up.
The one thing I will say, if you're playing smaller contests, be on the lookout because even in some of the higher dollar small field stuff I've been playing, people haven't been swapping. There was a scenario last week where I ended up with a 1v7. They all had the same 7 fighter, and multiple people were blocked from even cashing, and they still didn't swap out of Strickland. So if they're not doing it there, they're probably not doing it in even smaller contests. So again, just make sure. So, all right, guys, we gotta get going here. Let's talk about the debuting fighters. There are 6 on the card, and Jake, we'll keep it brief. Talk about stylistically, what is this fighter like? What is their background, the level of competition they face, and what is the outlook for their first matchup here in the UFC? And we'll go by first fight of the night to the last fight of the night. We have Daniel Marcos fighting Simon Oliveira. So Marcos, give me the rundown.
Yeah, so 29-year-old undefeated, 13-0, but he was fighting on the Peruvian regional scene. Hasn't really faced anything in terms of competition. Coming off a Contender Series win, which is his only fight in the last 3 years, which is pretty concerning. Doesn't seem to offer anything in grappling, so really just a striker. Those good leg kicks, kind of dead-legged his opponent on Contender Series. Still couldn't find a finish. So yeah, not overly excited about him, but decent striking, no grappling.
Fair enough. All right, the gauntlet known as the Peruvian regional scene. Okay, moving on down, we have the Bonfim brothers, Ismail and Gabriel. We'll start with Ismail against Terrence McKinney, which should be anytime he's on the card is a crazy matchup, but especially this one against Bonfim. The Ismail brother, what does he look like?
Yeah, so this is the older brother. He's 27, 18-3, but 2 of his losses came when he was like 15, which is crazy. He turned pro that early. He's a BJJ black belt, good striker, a little bit shorter than his brother, a little bit smaller. Now he's coming off 3 straight decisions, so he hasn't really shown the finishing lately. But before that, he was landing a bunch of finishes. So I still think he has finishing ability, but he has been going the distance in the last few. He's won 12 straight. His last loss was against Renato Moicano. So I mean, he's faced some tough competition. We'll see, man. Brutal matchup, but it's also a high upside matchup for him.
For sure, yeah. Be tuned in and don't hold your breath during that fight against McKinney. Now his brother Gabriel, I'm skipping down a little bit. He's against Monir Lazez, who we were fans of when he came in and fought his debut against Al Hassan. But Gabriel Bonfim is actually the favorite in this matchup.
Yeah, man, the rare debuting favorite against a legitimate fighter. So he's 25 years old, undefeated, 13-0 with a 100% finishing rate. The guy looks good. He has looked a little bit hittable at times, but really crisp striking, and he has 10 submissions, which is crazy for a guy with a boxing background, but obviously he has some ground game too. So he can get it done pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, really well-rounded fighter there. All right, scrolling back up against Cody Stamann, big drop in competition here. He's against Luan Lacerda in his UFC debut. What have you seen from him?
Yes, this guy's 30 years old, 12-1, training partner Jose Aldo. 10 has won 10 straight with 6 straight submissions. I would say pretty much a one-dimensional grappler, not much striking, but really slick on the mat, like really high-level BJJ specialist. I mean, the guy's super dangerous, just going for everything on the ground. So, I mean, he's getting a wrestler here. This is a really tough matchup for me and Stamann. But Stamann will have to mind his P's and Q's here and be careful not to, get trapped with a leg lock or something crazy.
Yeah, Lacerda, not a lot of tape on him out there, but the limited tape we could find, basically every single fight looked exactly the same. So we'll see if that translates here over into the UFC. And moving on down, I think 2 more fighters. Yep, still going. Melquizael Costa on short notice here against Thiago Moises.
Yeah, man, really tough spot here for Costa. 26 years old, 19-5, stepping in on short notice after Kutaladze dropped out. He's coming off a 3rd-round TKO with the LFA. The guy is decently well-rounded. BJJ brown belt, Muay Thai black belt. Loves to throw a lot of kicks, like very kick-heavy game. I would say his biggest weakness is poor defensive wrestling, which is not what you want going against a high-level grappler like Moises in your short notice debut.
Definitely not. What a downgrade, by the way. Kutaladze, dude's a killer, and going down to Costa, that's crazy. So, all right. And then finally, we have Bruno Ferreira, who is fighting Gregory Rodriguez in what should be a banger of a fight.
Yeah, man. I mean, what Rodriguez fight isn't a banger, first of all. But this guy looks, this guy's built like a fire hydrant. He's 30 years old, 9-0, 100% finishing rate. He's also stepping in on short notice, though. So I think that, you got to pay attention to that. because I think he took it on like less. I mean, it was less than 2 weeks. It was like 10 or 13 days or something. But basically, all of his fights look the same too. He just goes in, manhandles people, slams them to the mat, beats them up with ground and pound, looks for submissions. That's gonna be tougher against a world champion jiu-jitsu guy like Rodriguez, alleged world champion jiu-jitsu guy. We've yet to see that world champion quality, but yeah, man, I think it's a really tough matchup for Bruno, but I think we're going to be really interested in this guy down the road. And even today, I mean, you got to play both sides of every Rodriguez fight for sure.
Absolutely. Just his style of fight opens it up to potential knockouts from his opponent. So another question in the chat says, for late swapping today, single entry, 3 max, are you starting with both main events in your lineup and late swapping off of that, or the opposite? No, and Jake, correct me if I'm wrong, if you have a different opinion here. You build your lineups optimally before the slate starts. Only late swap in those contests if you're behind or you're blocked or you need something else to happen. I wouldn't go in with the intent to swap. I would just have the idea of swapping if I get behind or need to block.
Yeah, I agree with that, man. You don't want to start yourself in a less than optimal position and then try to improve as the slate goes on, because your options get less and fewer as the slate goes on.
Especially on this slate, because I don't know if it's on the lineup screen here. It is, yeah. So the first 6 fights all start or lock within 10 minutes of each other on DraftKings, which means you can't really swap anything with information. You have to wait until after early prelims are concluded. So limited information time here when it comes to late swapping. So build optimally to start, and then as the night goes on, look to make any changes if you have to. So, all right, 9 minutes left in the show. Good fighter, bad matchup, good matchup, Jake. Again, we're starting from the top. These are fighters that have less than 3 fights under their belt in the UFC. You're just going to tell me if they're actually good or they're actually bad, and if this matchup is actually good or actually bad for DFS purposes. Simon Oliveira.
Yeah, I think he's a bad fighter, but decent matchup. Going against a debuter that is just a striker, and Oliveira loves to look for guillotines, so maybe he can lock up a submission.
Fair enough. Josie Nunez.
I mean, she's definitely a fun fighter. I don't think she's going to be good when she faces the top of the division, but she's great against facing these, bums at the bottom, because she just goes out there and brawls. So in matchups like this, I would say she's a good fighter in a good matchup.
Fair enough. $9,500. Just a crazy price tag. And then we have her opponent, Zara Farron, who has dropped out of like 46 straight fights, is actually fighting tonight, hopefully.
I cannot believe this fight's actually happening. This is like the 3rd time or something they've scheduled it. Farron hasn't fought in years because she keeps botching her weight cut and dropping out. She's 0-2 in the UFC, has been finished in the first round both times, but both those finishes came on the mat. This is going to stay standing, so she'll finally get to show off her striking. So we'll see. She's kind of a mystery, but I'm going to call her a bad fighter. It's a good upside matchup for DFS, but I think she's going to be outgunned here by the Nunez, who's like 3 feet shorter, it's going to look absolutely insane. This is going to be like a circus show or something.
The optics on this fight are going to be nuts. But you saying high upside fight, some variance in there, and I see 4% projected ownership on DraftKings. I got to mix her in some. So, all right, moving on down, we have, I guess McKinney qualifies. He has 4 fights.
Yeah, man. He's another guy, he's good at what he does, but until he can figure out how to make it out of the first round, I don't think we can call him a good fighter, but he's an explosive fighter. He's a fun fighter, exciting fighter. It's a tough matchup, despite being a debuting opponent. He's going against a guy who's never been knocked out, but has been submitted a few times. So, I mean, I think he's always a high upside fighter, and it's not a terrible matchup for upside, but I don't think it's like a great matchup or anything. I don't think he's a great fighter, so I guess I'm calling him a bad fighter and sort of a bad matchup. I mean, it feels gross saying that. He's probably going to score 120, but yeah.
We'll take it. I mean, he's only really crushed us in that very first fight, and he didn't even crush us because we were on him in that fight. Every other fight, he's only scored 105 or less, right? So I'm sure he'll score 140 now that I said that. So,
right.
All right, moving on down. Jonathan Almeida, who is 9,700, the most expensive fighter on the card.
Yeah, man. I mean, he's good at what he does too. I think he's really good at grappling, but he's fighting a bunch of bums. So I think I might call him a good fighter because he's good at executing his game plan. We have no idea. If he saw a second round, he might guess so hard. If he was forced to stand up, he might get knocked out. But this guy is an absolute animal at taking people down and finishing them. So I think I'm going to call him a good fighter and a good matchup in that sense.
Certainly a good matchup, that is for sure. Lazzez, Monir Lazzez, who we mentioned earlier briefly in that matchup.
Yeah, so he's a one-dimensional striker, but I think he is a good fighter. I think it's going to be a high-volume striking battle. It's definitely a really tough matchup. So I don't know if it's good from that sense, but I think we're going to see a ton of striking volume. So it's good for a DFS perspective in terms of putting up big striking numbers.
Fair enough. All right, moving on down, we have Ihor Potieria, who's fighting Shogun. Ihor, in his debut, gave up roughly 600 DraftKings points to Nego Mariano. Good, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup.
This guy is a complete fraud. He's a terrible fighter, but he's in a great matchup.
Fair enough. All right, I think we got them all. Yeah, hell yeah. All right,
I think we missed Lacerda, I think.
Oh no, we got him in the we got him in the debut, right? Luan Lacerda.
Oh, well, yeah. All right, I guess we already talked about him then, but
Oh,
it is a really tough matchup. Yeah.
okay. So we got 24 fighters down that we've talked about now individually. All right, 5 minutes left in the show. What we're going to do is talk about fight that you have to target in DFS. Jake will give out his favorite prize picks play, and we'll talk about our stream parlay of the week where we each pick a prop bet and parlay it together here. It's been a while, so it's we gotta bring the fire here. So Jake, a fight that you have to target in DFS. Whoever wins, you think is pretty likely to put up, let's say, 100 plus points.
I mean, I feel like I'd be doing a disservice by not pointing out like the no-brainer McKinney versus Ishmael Bonfim. I mean, McKinney's a guy that either gets a finish in the first 2.5 minutes or else he turns into a pumpkin and gets smashed after that. So I think you have to target both sides of that fight.
Give me one under the radar.
So under the radar, I think is the Nunes Farron fight. I think that's going to be really high volume, and I think that someone's going to get knocked out there.
Fair enough. All right. Let's see here. Really quick question from Tony. Says he feels Neil Magny could be a low risk, high reward underdog. Is he crazy? What are your thoughts? Jake, I kind of feel like he's actually high risk, low reward, but what do you think?
Yeah, so the problem with Magny is the times he does well is when he can mix in grappling and striking. And this is a really tough matchup for him to get much going with his grappling. Like, no one wants to mess with Burns on the mat, and Magny's been prone to getting submitted. So I think it's going to be a harder upside matchup for Magny. Like last fight, he could control. He finished D-Rod on the mat because he had the grappling advantage. Like he's not going to have the grappling advantage here, so he's going to want to keep it standing. And honestly, I think Burns is a more dangerous striker, so I think it's a tough spot for Magny to really hit any sort of ceiling. Even though we have seen him do well at certain points in the past, I don't think this is one of those points.
Yeah, and to be fair, Tony, there aren't many underdogs that I would qualify as high floor, high ceiling. A lot of these fights are projected to end inside the distance. Many of these underdogs have a realistic, if not probable, chance of being knocked out or submitted early. So, Jake, from that perspective, it's tough to find fighters below 8K outside of the 5 round underdogs, and even Teixeira doesn't qualify in that answer, right? Like so many of these underdog fighters have a floor of literally zero that it kind of makes it tough to base any decisions on floor for your underdogs this week.
Yeah, man, I think we really got to look at upside and look at finishing. I mean, so many of these guys are dependent on getting finishes. I mean, if you're going to look at floor, I mean, you could look at guys that are facing the less dangerous opponents like Lacerda, like Stamen, has one finish in the UFC, but still Lacerda is not going to land much striking volume. He could just lay on his back for most of the fights. I mean, does he truly have a floor?
Right. And judging by how he's reacted to some hits in the tape that I found, I'm not even sure that he's safe on the feet, right? So it's kind of tough. All right, so a couple more minutes here. You see the Prize Picks promo code at the top of the screen here. Use promo code Occupy. Get a 100% deposit match bonus over at Prize Picks up to $100. Parlay props from all kinds of different sports. Their UFC lines are especially soft. Jake, what's your favorite? Do you want to continue with that same fight and give that favorite bet out? Or do you want to go with another one?
Yeah, I actually do want to give that one out. So Cody Stamen under 2.5 takedowns, I think is really solid for a couple different reasons. Lacerda, one-dimensional grappler. Stamen would have to be a fool to take him down. And in a recent interview this week, Stamen even said, like, I'm not going to take this guy down. Like, I know that he's only dangerous on the mat. So, I mean, when you have the fighter telling you he's not going to shoot for takedown and you get under 2.5, I think that's kind of a no-brainer that you hop on that. I mean, maybe Lacerda pulls guard and the scorekeepers count that as a takedown, but I don't know if he's going to do that 3 times.
Right. I feel like if it hits the mat once, maybe twice, then this fight might be a wrap. So there's your Prize Picks free square for this week. I'm sure it'll fail, but they like to give out free squares over under half a point. Here's your free square this week. They didn't even offer it as a bonus. It's just under 2.5 takedowns by Cody Stamen. So, all right, close it out with our stream parlay of the week. Remember that Jake puts all of his favorite bets throughout the week over at his site, MMADFS.com. And then the best lines that are remaining, he puts in the daily plug Friday evenings at OccupyFantasy.com. And what we'll do is I'll pick a side. Jake will pick a side. Jake, we talked about that Moises and Costa fight. Costa on short notice, poor takedown defense. I think you have to go with Moises by submission here. That'll be my side of the stream parlay.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. Plus 180. I think there's a good chance we see that, even though, Moises, he's been to a lot of decisions in the UFC, but I think this is, a spot where he should get a submission. And just to kind of make this a little bit juicier, opposed to giving out like an even money one, I'm going to go with Andrade round 1 KO. I think this is a big mismatch of talent. Andrade's last 5 wins have all come early. 4 of those were knockouts. 3 of those were in the first round. Plus 460, I think that's pretty decent. If you want to play it safer, you can go round 1 or round 2 KO at plus 230. But I'm gonna take a little chance here so we can get this up to some interesting odds. Try to win some money tonight. So if we parlay those together, it'll be plus 1468.
All right, we can live with that. We'll take a 1400 parlay to start off the 2023 stream season. So appreciate everyone listening. As always, if you made it this far, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Get notified when we go live, upload new videos. We would love to have a consistent schedule, but between NFL and some of the fights being canceled and the different timing of the fights, some weeks we'll do pre-recorded, some weeks we'll do live videos. If you're subscribed, you'll be notified whenever we make that decision. So just make sure you're subscribed here on YouTube to the Occupy Fantasy channel. Give us a thumbs up if you like the video. That lets us know to continue to make these UFC videos, helps others find these videos in the future as well. Any questions? It's too late to comment on the video. Sorry. Join our Discord server, occupyfantasy.com/Discord. Link is in the description below. You can chat with us, sweat the fights with us. It's a great time on Saturday nights. Follow Jake on Twitter at DFS_MMA. Go read his work, MMADFS.com. He does this sheet every week. It breaks down every single fight from a betting and DFS perspective, has the archive, historical, UFC, DFS information. OccupyFantasy.com, Jake writes the daily plug, top plays, best bets, lineup construction tips. Our model ranks every fighter, FanDuel and DraftKings with projected ownership. The lineup builder, build up to 300 lineups using the optimal lineup criteria. I think I got all the promo out of the way. Jake, I'm going to close it out here. Let's get a hot take, one way or the other, or a stance you feel really strong on today. Give me some sort of strong opinion on this card.
I think Jessica Andrade is the highest scorer on the slate, and she outscores Almeida and potentially knocks him out of the winning lineup.
Whew, okay. I will say I'm going to say the McKinney fight makes it out of the first round. And I think just from a generic fight analysis, that seems pretty safe. But McKinney's fights are nowhere near safe getting out in the first round. But I think this matchup, I think he slows it down a little bit. I think not McKinney. I think the opponent slows us down some. And I think this gets out of the first round.
All right. Yeah, I mean, the odds to end in the first round are negative 150, so I think that counts as a hot take.
Phew. Okay, I wasn't sure. Glad we're safe there. All right, so again, Jake, Brian, Occupy Fantasy DFS, or MMADFS.com. Thank you everyone for listening. Enjoy UFC 283.